conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, we're about a week removed from an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and state representative here in Kentucky, Daniel Grossberg, continues with some overheated rhetoric when he says that Trump will have tribunals and execute his opponents. Trump said something important in his acceptance speech when it comes to the future, this entire electric vehicle push here in Kentucky that our legislature and our governor have really bet big on. And speaking of that, some of these bets they've made, is it possible that they ended up with tax dollars, Kentucky tax dollars, incentivizing the Communist Party, China's Communist Party, from investing in Kentucky with some of their companies? We'll take a look at that. The left is peddling talking points on school choice that is really centered around the idea that somehow government earns its own money, that government doesn't make money from taxing citizens, that it's like an actual business that earns money. It's quite ridiculous, and the language treats children as commodities, not important citizens and not important future of our Commonwealth here, as they concern more about the public schools as an entity than they're concerned about educational outcomes. We'll take a look at one of these headlines. And then finally, I have been, and those of you who watched last week, if you're watching on the TV or on social media on a video format, if you don't listen to the audio podcast that comes out each and every single day, you know that a week ago I started doing a series where I was covering state house races in Kentucky, kind of giving you the breakdown of some of these races that are happening in Kentucky. Well, that has continued over the last week. If you want to hear more about those races, head on over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com, and hit the Listen Now tab, and you can see all the different places to tune into the Andrew Cooperrider Show. But we'll continue with that discussion today, covering a couple races. So if you like what you hear there, head on over. And as always, if you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email us, info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. You can also head on over to theandrewshow.com and hit the contact tab to reach out. You know, I'm pretty worried for my country, not just because of the attempted assassination on Donald Trump, not just because of our economic standing, not just because of the endless wars, but, you know, there's power in having hope for the future. And where hope comes from is that while today may be bad, tomorrow may be even better. And right now, for our country, I'm losing hope, because I'm not seeing how we end up getting out of this tailspin. I'm not just talking about an economic tailspin, but I'm talking about where we are politically, the division, the lack of trust that's going on from both sides. Because after 9/11, there was a moment of unity. After assassination attempt on Reagan, there was a moment of unity. Moments of unity typically follow any major event. I mean, the bombing on the Boston Marathon, there was a moment of unity. But after this attempted assassination on Trump, there is no moment of unity at all. In fact, we're even more divided than ever. And what's dividing us shows just how much there is of a lack of trust in anything at all. And when there's a lack of trust in anything at all in our society, it will lead to our downfall. You have a new poll coming out that says 35% of registered Democrats believe that Donald Trump staged the assassination attempt himself. And then you got people on the right, of course, who rightfully so think that somehow government actors must have been involved. It's hard to look at what details we're getting about what happened that day and not see it's extreme incompetence, at least, but it's so the level of incompetence, the level of being unable to do their jobs, leaves one to wonder that, well, this must have been maybe an inside job, somebody within the government trying to make it happen. So you have people on the right thinking that, people on the left thinking it was staged, that all of it's somehow made up. Both of them, though, require that somehow the government was involved, right? I mean, if the assassination attempt on him was staged, that means some members of the government have to be involved. You'd think on the left and on the right, you'd obviously assume that some members of the government were involved in setting it up, and it's just leading to a whole lot of consternation between it. And at the bare minimum, everybody thinks the government is incredibly incompetent. And that means nobody is going to trust the official story on this assassination attempt. Nobody at all. Nobody on the left, nobody on the right, no matter what gets put out by the government and by the media and reported on, nobody will believe it. No one trusts the mainstream media. The Biden debate really helped show that, but so did COVID. Over the course of COVID, we saw real time that a lack of honesty. They never once came out and just admitted, we don't know what we're doing. Here's some suggestions. Maybe it's a good idea for you to do this. We're still trying to figure it out. Instead, they came out with the force of their conviction, so much so that they wanted to be a dictator on our lives and said, we are so sure that we're right. We want to control everything you do, everything where you eat, how many people can go somewhere, whether or not you're allowed to leave your house. They were making rules about how many people you could have over for Thanksgiving. And they never once admitted that there was no science behind it at all. Almost if they just come out and said, look, we don't know what's happening. We're doing the best we can. Here's some suggestions, and then leave it at that. It would have kept this trust going, but that has really snowballed. The mainstream media not asking the right questions, ignoring experts with different opinions, not trying to just find the truth, led a lot of people off. And then you have the Biden debate, which has really hurt the mainstream media in two ways. One, those who watch the mainstream media often and saw that Biden debate and said, wow, he is really not mentally there, realized that all these mainstream media storylines they've been getting about how Biden's fine, don't worry about it, he's doing good. This is just something that Republicans are making up. They're just cleverly editing videos, was a claim we heard from mainstream media, but people saw it themselves in real time, so they lost trust. And then, after the Biden debate, mainstream media, because they realized that they look ridiculous for not having called this out before, started to go ahead and call out more things about Joe Biden. But you see, the left was so used to mainstream media never calling out the left and treating them the same way they treat the right, that now the members on the left and the Democrats are mad at their mainstream media because they're shilling for Trump too much. I'm dead serious. I've seen it all over social media where I see a self-prescribed leftist literally calling MSNBC Donald Trump shilling. That industry, that channel is literally doing this in order to help Donald Trump get elected. That is a real belief on the left. So nobody trusts mainstream media. We certainly don't trust no one else. We don't trust each other either. And this is what happens when there's a lack of community. For so long, the church was our community, and then government had came along and said, we will fulfill so much of the church's roles and responsibilities. We, the government, will be your community. But nobody trusts the government anymore on either side. Nobody trusts the journalists who are supposed to keep the government accountable anymore on either side. And this is why we end up falling into the place we are now, where it's hard for me to see a way forward. And as evidence of the lack of unity, we need but look at one of these politicians here in Kentucky, a state representative, Daniel Grossberg. He himself said a talking line early on a interview he did with Terry Miners there last week. We'll take a listen to exactly what he had to say and how it's evidence of these politicians, they know they're lying to you, but that doesn't stop them from literally saying that you could potentially be murdered if Donald Trump gets elected. We'll go over that story. After this short break, you'll listen to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Are you a product, service, or business trying to reach conservative Kentuckians? Well, the Andrew Cooperrider Show can be exactly what you're looking for. Unlike anything else out there, the Andrew Cooperrider Show reaches conservative Kentuckians statewide through radio, TV, podcasting, social media, as well as email. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show to see if we have a marketing package that fits your budget. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show at theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. You can hit the contact tab, or you can also email the Andrew Cooperrider Show at info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Let's be the marketing solution that your business has been looking for. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So sometimes politicians, campaign people, political commentators, even on both sides, they start to believe a little too hard what they're saying. They start to believe that what is nothing but campaign speech, what is nothing but what you're supposed to say, what is nothing but talking points are actually accurate and true. Now, those of us who work in politics know it's quite the opposite. Unless you're one of the few actually honest people working on campaigns who's winning for the sake of trying to do something really important and not caring per se, not caring if you get elected, but more so saying, I'd rather not get elected, lying about what I stand for. But if you fall into the position where you just want political power, you'll use whatever messaging makes sense. I mean, it's the entire reason why polling companies make money. You would like to think that polling companies are making all their money because they do these polls for media that gets reported on and all those things, but that's not it at all. Campaigns hire them all the time to poll about messaging, to poll what they should say, what do people want to hear. They're shaping their message for the voter. But they, most of the time, realize that what they're saying isn't actually true. It's just rhetoric. And it's this superheated rhetoric that has been lobbied at Trump in a way we've never seen about any other politicians out there. We see them taking things out of context and them attacking policies, and occasionally they may cross a line on attacking a family member when maybe they shouldn't. But we don't often see this kind of heated rhetoric like this guy is literally Hitler, like we see out of the left so often. But Daniel Grossberg gave us, at the same time, a taste of the rhetoric, and then a few minutes later, he was pretty honest about how he exactly felt. He was on Terry Miner's show up there in Louisville, and Terry Miners had asked him to go ahead and sell him on why people would want to vote for Joe Biden. What is the selling point? Pretend you're talking to a middle-of-the-road person. What are you looking at? What are you thinking about? And Daniel Grossberg responded the following way. Well, let's take a listen to what he actually had to say.
If I had to choose between the known certainty of who Donald Trump is and what he would do as president, and we saw what he did last time, and this time he's saying he's going to go 10 times more MAGA. He's going to be a dictator on day one. He's going to start having tribunals and executing the people who are against him. He's going to weaponize government by purging all the civil service and replacing them with people who have a loyalty oath not to the country but to him.
There'd be tribunals, and Trump would execute his political opponents, because we know so often as we watch Trump, one of the things he often talks about is literally executing his political opponents. He mentions it often. Actually, that's something he's never once mentioned. Ever once has Donald Trump ever mentioned literally killing his own political rivals. It hasn't happened. But regardless, Daniel Grossberg peddled out that kind of superheated rhetoric, the same kind of rhetoric that leads to people doing violent acts like what we saw just this past week. Now, Daniel Grossberg isn't actually dumb enough. I mean, he maybe somebody who was transgender in college, but he's not actually dumb enough to, quote unquote, get high on his own supply, to end up believing the own campaign rhetoric that he's peddling out there. Because later on in the interview, Terry Miners actually asked him if he really thought Trump was going to execute people. And he said, do I think Trump's actually going to execute people? No, probably not. But that didn't stop him from saying it early on. That was his reflex, to say Trump would literally kill you. That's why you shouldn't vote for him. And so it's when you see that clash on either side, when you see the fact that literally, and I was talking about they're having no hope in the last segment, when you've seen the outcome of literally just lying about your opponents and pretending that they're going to do things that you admittedly, in Daniel Grossberg's own words and Representative Grossberg's own words, He knew Trump did not mean. At that point, you're saying, I don't care if people die. I don't care if people get hurt. I don't care if I'm driving division in my society. I don't care if I'm causing people who've known each other for years to be at each other's throats and one side calling the other side Nazis. I don't care about the tension and the divisiveness and bringing people together. I so don't care. What I care about is one thing and one thing only, and that's winning. And so if I have to lie to you and tell you that that guy will murder you in order to get you to vote against him, even if it results in, I don't know, a firefighter, a first responder who is more than willing to put his life on the line to help protect and save others, even if it results in a wonderful person like that's death, they don't care. What's important is they got to win office again. And as long as we continue to have jokers like that in office, I don't know how our country sees much of a way forward, because these people are willing to sell out their entire society just for a shot at a little bit of power, just for a shot at a state house to keep your state house representative seat or maybe run for higher office eventually. It's really quite disgusting. Shame on you, Representative Grossberg. Shame on you. Now, Kentucky has spent over $500 million on electric vehicle in cash handouts and economic incentives. Obviously, you know about the Ford battery plant, but there's been other programs going on all around the state where they've given literally economic incentive packages, including cash, free land. I mean, in Ford's case, $250 million already given to them in a cash forgivable loan. Land was given to them that was paid off for $50 million. Training programs that are being paid for by the taxpayer. Training reimbursement costs that are being paid for by the taxpayer, where they're giving money back to these companies. Well over $500 million of your money has been invested into this. And I talk about this often, and I talk about how it isn't just Beshear. People want to talk about, this is Beshear's electric vehicle mandate. It's not just him. It is quite literally your Republican legislature. And it's not just your Republican legislature. It's specifically, we could say that what has happened here is that you have Beshear, who probably believes that these electric vehicles are great, or at least believes it is the future, because the Democrats are going to try their hardest to manufacture it and make it happen. But then you have Republicans who said, oh, well, somebody's coming in to put in a big factories and money. We don't care if it's actually a sustainable or something that like a real industry or not. We're all on board with giving cash handouts to a company like Ford. They have a lot of lobbyists, and they pay us good money through those lobbyists, through fun perks and other things. So, of course, we'll make it happen. But it's also the representatives, because remember, most of the state house reps, other than leadership, didn't know that they were actually voting when they voted in 2021 in that special session to give $410 million to build a battery plant in Kentucky. They just were told it was some great project on the tune of the same as Toyota will be the next Toyota. You want to vote for this. And so they voted for it without even knowing what the industry would be or what was going to be manufactured. And what it ended up being is electric vehicles. And on top of that, other economic incentives have been given to other companies regarding that. This past week, we covered something about the $400 million plant that's Ford's building now in Shelbyville, or looking to build in Shelbyville, and all the tax incentives being given to that plant already. But there's been other plants out in Western Kentucky that have also gotten those economic incentives. But what's really key to understand about that specific industry, the electric vehicle industry, it in and of itself is not an industry that would basically exist. It wouldn't be large, it wouldn't be a big deal without government forcing it to happen. Because think about it. What benefit is it to you, the consumer, for electric vehicles? Now, there may be people out there who go ahead and get it because they get one electric vehicle, they have one gas, they live in the city, the electric vehicle's made their commuter, it's cheaper or more convenient for them to go ahead and just, plug their car in at night so they don't have to worry about stopping at the gas station. And of course, they could be fun and more enjoyable to drive as well. They're pretty quick on the acceleration there because they have instant torque. And so it could be something where you like the technology, you like driving it, you like not having to stop at the gas station. Those could be reasons why individuals go ahead and purchase electric vehicles, but they were always going to be basically hobby cars. Because who on the masses, who would buy electric vehicles as the masses to replace their gas vehicles? The expense of electric vehicles as they sat, the expense to manufacture and make and produce, when you considered how much they cost compared to how much a gas vehicle costs of the same make, model, and trim level, what you would end up with is a situation where electric vehicles cost significantly more, so much so that you would have to drive electric vehicles. We did a deep dive into the numbers here on the show. This was a while ago, so as I'm citing these to you, just know we did the math on this show publicly. You'd have to drive a gas-powered vehicle, or an electric vehicle, and not pay anything for electricity for 144,000 miles before you broke even with buying a gas counterpart of the same exact vehicle. And that's assuming as well, at normal full pop at the time we did the math, that you don't finance it. If you finance it, it would be even longer because, of course, interest would add up. And that math you cannot get around. You also can't get around the fact that, electric vehicles, as they sat, especially a few years ago, before we started getting all these government handouts, the range concern, the concern about how far can you drive on electric, would have meant that the average person wouldn't buy, if they had to choose one vehicle, they wouldn't buy an electric vehicle because, they want a vehicle that they can go long distances of, that they can just fill up with gas when they need to stop for gas, because the infrastructure to put fuel in a car already exists all across this nation, but chargers for electric vehicles didn't exist. So it was never going to happen without government involvement. And so under the Biden administration, we've seen an acceleration of offering both tax incentives, cash handouts, big money being handed out. But what does that look like with Trump coming into office potentially? We'll go over that after this short break, because Trump did mention it in his speech. Certainly worth talking about. We'll have that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Listen up, my fellow business owners, because I got to tell you about a business that's incredibly important to any company's operations, and that's Amston, A-M-P-S-T-U-N, Amston. It's out of Richmond, Kentucky, and they provide cybersecurity for commercial businesses, and they've got dozens of years of experience working with government and private entities alike. So reach out to Amston today. That's AMPSTUN.com, AMPSTUN, Amston. Reach out to them today. Tell them Andrew sent you over. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. For the break, we were just beginning to talk about how something that Donald Trump had said in his nomination acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention tells us that, something that Kentucky has staked its future on, spent over $500 million of taxpayer funds on, might be under some scrutiny, might be under assault. Why? Because we decided to throw tons and tons of your dollars into electric vehicles. And as explained before the break, the entire industry is based upon government giving them massive amounts of money to make it work. Because you as a consumer would never actually want to buy an electric vehicle outside of some very small situations, which means that it could never be a big part of the economy. Tesla would probably be the only major electric vehicle manufacturer because they're cool, they have different technology, they're fast, and they would continue to innovate and create new vehicles and as such, but it wouldn't be something Ford would get into because the demand for electric vehicles isn't actually there. So the government had to come in and subsidize it. Subsidize it in one way, for example, they gave Ford over $3 billion to build these electric vehicle battery plants in the southern United States. That's how Kentucky ended up getting 2 of these factories. The Fed gave them $3 billion to build the factories, and then we gave them another $410 million. But without those kinds of economic incentives and cash, Ford was never going to build them because the demand isn't there. As evidence of this, Ford has already delayed its building of its second factory because it said, the demand just isn't there for us to go ahead and deliver the jobs, but also the batteries. And that leaves a question of, we were promised 5,000 jobs. If they only end up delivering 2,500, do we get our money back? How's that going to work? Most likely not. Ford's got a lot over Kentucky. We know how these things work. They'll probably get to go ahead and keep it while they don't deliver or follow through, or they'll get an extension to follow through on the amount of jobs they've always promised. And so Donald Trump coming in and made a statement about how the gravy train for the electric vehicle industry under him would be over. No longer would the government go ahead and finance the push of electric vehicles and basically mandate these electric vehicles. Let's take a listen to what Donald Trump had to say during his speech.
Actually incredible waste of taxpayer dollars that is fueling the inflation crisis. They've spent trillions of dollars on things having to do with the Green New Scam. It's a scam. And that's caused tremendous inflationary pressures in addition to the cost of energy. And all of the trillions of dollars that are sitting there not yet spent, we will redirect that money for important projects like roads, bridges, dams, and we will not allow it to be spent on meaningless green new scam ideas. And I will end the electric vehicle mandate on day one. Thereby saving the U.S. auto industry from complete obliteration, which is happening right now, and saving U.S. customers thousands and thousands of dollars per car.
So you see, Donald Trump saying he's going to roll back those economic incentives means that the Kentucky legislature and Beshear, because they bet big on such a, unreliable industry, means that the Kentucky taxpayer could be out over $500 million, and clawing back that money gets even more difficult when you figure that, it may have been paid out to the Communist Party of China, the CCP, because one of the battery manufacturers going in place here in Kentucky, there's a $2 billion plant being built in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Actually, it's the AESC battery plant. Now, what's funny is if you take a look at the headlines from at the time, and really there hasn't been much news on this at all. You haven't really heard Beshear pushing it too much. There's some stories from back in 23. And then, of course, when it was initially announced, there's a few stories, but they really haven't published this out quite this same amount. You actually probably have never heard of the AESC battery plant. They don't really talk about it a whole lot. And why might that be, you wonder? Well, it might have something to do with the fact that they don't want you or the media looking too much into it. Because when you do look at the actual stories, you'll find out the media has done a horrible job of actually researching who owns this company. But don't worry, where the mainstream media here in Kentucky has failed, Andrew Cooperrider is here to deliver the facts. Because if you take, for an example, this News 40 report on the factory, here's a line from it. It says, this newest addition to the Kentucky Trans Park is for AESC, a company based out of Japan. In fact, you'll see that quite a lot of times. They'll say it's a company based out of Japan. Almost every single story about this Bowling Green project will say it's based out of Japan. AESC is a Japanese company, and which it was founded in Japan, and I believe its headquarters are probably in Japan still. But perhaps they actually say it's Japan-based because they don't want you looking into, who actually owns AESC? Because what you'll find out is that Nissan actually sold its majority stake in AESC batteries to China's Envision Group in 2019. In fact, 80% of AESC is owned by China's Envision Group. And what is China's Envision Group? Well, it was founded by one Li Zhang, a Chinese billionaire. And you don't become a billionaire in China unless the Chinese Communist Party says so and you pay them off and give them their VIG. So how much of your money went to Li Zhang in China? How much of your money went to a billionaire, a Chinese billionaire, who we know is making large donations to the Communist Party? Well, just a smidge over $122 million. That's right, Beshear and our legislature, because they approved it, gave $122 million to a Chinese-owned company owned by a Chinese billionaire, making big payoffs to the Communist Party of China. That perhaps is why Beshear never bothered to mention it was a Chinese company, and they keep pretending it was Japan owned. Because there was another battery plant that was supposed to come into Kentucky. In fact, at one point, Kentucky was going to give $21 million to Cattle, C-A-T-L, battery manufacturer. But when it's federal funding, not that we looked into it as a state and realized it was a Chinese-owned company with ties to the CCP. No, when the federal government came in and canceled its benefits, its incentives to build these battery plants, well, Kentucky went ahead and followed suit, canceling $21 million they were giving to Cattle. So, do you think China, who's one of the nation's largest carbon producers, actually really cares about electric vehicles and turning everything electric? Absolutely not. What they care about is they care about playing a con on America. How can they get more American dollars into their pockets to fund America's demise? Well, the way they do that is by putting forward these companies that hit the sweet spots for American investors, hit the sweet spots to getting the cash handouts, and nothing, if things goes horrible, if everything goes up, belly up, well, it doesn't matter. They're Chinese and Japanese-based companies. I think that's something even worth noticing, is that as we're talking about all these companies we're giving over $500 million to of Kentucky taxpayer funds, over $500 million as of this count, just in Envision AESC batteries and in SK batteries with a partnership with Ford. You know, we have given $532 million to these companies. $32 million, more than $500 million. The federal government has given them billions of dollars. And they're not giving it to American companies. They're giving it to places like SK Batteries, which stands for South Korea. That's who Ford's partnering with. It's a South Korean company. They're giving it to people like Envision AESC, which is a Japanese-based, 80% owned by China company. They were trying to give it to Cattle, a Chinese-owned company. These are foreign-owned companies, and we're just shelling out the money to them and betting so big on an industry that is, well, not a very safe bet. Now, coming up after this, we'll talk about school choice. Interesting study all the media is quoting. We'll go into what the truth is and some of the ridiculous headlines after this short break.
Lexington Overstock Warehouse is Central Kentucky's best source for stylish new home furnishings. Don't pay retail. With our low overhead operating structure and big name brands, we offer the absolute best values on new furniture for every room. Shop online anytime at LexingtonOverstockWarehouse.com or visit our weekends only showroom located at 156 West Tiverton Way. Right now, for listeners of this show, we're offering a special discount for our online customers. Use coupon code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your online order today. Lexington Overstock Warehouse, low overhead equals really low prices.
And you're back in this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So school choice obviously is coming up on the ballot in November. We've talked about it quite a lot here on the show. And the reason why we talk about it so often is because, well, quite frankly, the media is doing the work for the other side extremely in order to push against voting yes on Amendment 2. What Amendment 2, simply put, would allow us to do is have the conversation about school choice. The way our state constitution was wrote, mixed with how our state Supreme Court has somehow interpreted it, some would say erroneously, has left us in a position where if we want to have any kind of discussion about even things like educational savings accounts, where you could put your own money into an educational savings account and then use it how you see fit, and just it would give you a tax incentive to do so. So it's your own money being spent on your own kid's education. You just get tax benefit for doing that, where you know it's a deductible cost basically. Well, even something like that now isn't allowed according to our state Supreme Court. So whether you're for somebody who wants every single dollar, voucher for voucher, you know, the $23,000 that schools like Fayette County Public Schools and Jefferson County Public Schools here in Kentucky are spending that much money, $23,000, $24,000 around there. Even if you're somebody who says, I want you writing a check to the parents for $24,000 a year in a voucher format that they could take to any private school they want to take it to, or they can spend it on anything that's educational based for their kids that they want to. They could use it to go to a private school, but let's say that private school is only 13, 14 grand a year. Well, they can go ahead and take the remaining, $7 grand and spend it on tutors and educational camps and those kinds of specialized magnet educational programs. Or if they have special needs, they have special tutors they could work with. Even if you're somebody who says, I want that plan, or if you're somebody who simply says, I don't want any tax dollars actually going into any of these private schools. But what I do think would be fair is that parents that can go ahead and deduct child educational expenses from their taxes at the state level. I want them to be able to put money into a savings account to buy school supplies, to tutoring, for any of those things I just kind of mentioned. I do believe I want them to be able to do that. If that's how you feel, you have to vote yes on Amendment 2, because it doesn't mean you're prescribing to anything along the lines of school choice per se. You're just saying, I want to have the debate, I want to have the discussion, but we can't have that debate or discussion until this amendment passes, because it doesn't matter what the outcome is without the amendment, it's not going to happen. Well, the other side, though, is certainly going out there, pushing this heavily against it. And one of the interesting headlines I've seen, this came from the Herald Leader, was this headline here that said, report KY funding private schools could cost $1.2 billion. The top line of that says, a new report says diverting public money to private schools in Kentucky would cost at least hundreds of millions of dollars and jobs from the public schools. Now, of course, the idea of cost, let's think about this for a second. The idea of would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. They act like that money is like the government's money in the first place. They act like that money didn't come from, you, the taxpayer, in the first place. They act like that money wasn't from your pocket to begin with. No, instead, they're writing these headlines like they believe that it was the government's money, like the government earned it and it cost them money. And this says, it costs public schools jobs too. Where are these kids not going to suddenly be educated? Will these teachers' jobs not move over to other schools? Will their jobs not transfer? That's not what we've seen. Actually, in states that have robust school choice options, you actually see teachers having higher payments. You're actually seeing teachers making more and reporting better success and more enjoyable working conditions. There's a reason why you don't often see private schools complaining about the fact they can't seem to hire teachers, but you hear that from public schools all the time. It's a completely different environment. So the jobs won't actually be cost. That would be like saying that, if we give the contract to pave this road, we've got a $10 million contract to make a highway, let's say, and we can give it to this road building company, or we can give it to this road building company. And so by deciding you're going to go ahead and give that $10 million to this road building company, now this road building company is coming out there and saying, you're costing the taxpayers $10 million and thousands or hundreds of construction worker jobs. Like, no, I'm spending the same amount to accomplish the same goal. And there's the same amount of people. The job still has to be done. I'm just choosing this company to do it over that company. That's it. The only people who are going to lose money in that situation would maybe be the teachers' unions, because if this option over here doesn't mess with the teachers' unions and this option over here does, they're the only ones that are going to lose out. And of course, as well, when you aren't the only provider in an area, when you don't have people locked in, that might mean the public schools might have to actually make good decisions. Something I brought up last week on the show, but people like Fayette County Public Schools not firing an art teacher at Castee Elementary because they just can't afford it anymore. And then they go on to hire Ron Clark, who, by the way, had a daytime television movie made about him from Matthew Perry. Then hire Ron Clark and pay him $26,500 to be a keynote speaker at an employee training event. How far could that have gone to funding an art class, the same art class you just cut? It's absolutely ridiculous. But the other thing that's telling about these articles, take for example, that Herald Leader article that I just went through with you there. So student, the word student, if you search that article for the word student or students or children, you'll find it only comes up 4 times. And every time it comes up, they're talking about students could go somewhere else. They never once in the entire story, in this conversation about money and how it's going to somehow cost the taxpayers over $1 billion, they never once talk about kids as if they are the thing we're trying to teach, who's trying to learn. Instead, they're treating them like they're a commodity to be traded. They're treating them like they're a trading card or a resource that they're trying to hold on to, not like they're the thing that they're trying to educate the children, not like they're the consumer, or the parents, not like they're the consumer, which is an interesting concept, because if you're saying that, well, it could cost us $1.2 billion, well, you'd think what your argument then would be is that these kids are not going to be educated, but they're not going to have the ability to claim that these kids are not going to be educated because, well, states with school choice options, they definitely don't fare worse, and they certainly don't want you looking into how many states have school choice options, because what you'll find out is all but 2 do. 2 states don't have any school choice options at all, as defined by our Kentucky Supreme Court, and Kentucky's one of them. Then there's only one other, and that's it. All 48 other states have options, including California, including New York. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Well, I said I'd go over a couple of races, and there's definitely a race I want to go over that I find pretty interesting here, but I know we're running short on time. I only got about 2 minutes left, so I will mention a little bit about this race as quickly as I can. This is in District 24, which is in the Hart LaRue County kind of area, and it's kind of fascinating when you look at it here. Ryan Bivens on the Republican side is going up against a Johnny Pennington on the other side of things. Johnny Pennington and Ryan Bivens going up against one another. This seat was left vacant when Brandon Reed left the seat. It's an interesting race because there's something interesting that happened in the Republican primary mixed with the fact that there was a special election at the time. And it ended up with an individual getting elected into that position by the name of Courtney Gilbert, who will only serve in that position until the end of this year. And she was basically elected with only about 4 days left of session. So very short amount of time. And they didn't put Courtney Gilbert on any of the committees at all. And so it's a fascinating story, and it goes into how the party picks their candidates. Fascinating district to dig into. I just don't have the time to do it. So you got to make sure you tune in tomorrow. We'll have that. We'll be talking too about another law that's going into effect that I kind of disagree with. We'll talk a little bit more about a few more laws like that. And we have another instance of Beshear just literally showing you that when it comes to this economic development thing, it's not about what's best for Kentucky, but about what's best for its donors, what's best for the right people, and how people are making a buck off your buck in the government. We'll have all that and more tomorrow, but so make sure you tune in. You got to head over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab to check out all the different places to listen to The Andrew Show, The Andrew Cooperrider Show podcast, Otherwise, if you watch on TV, listen on radio, or watch on any of the social medias, we'll see you back next week, but please tune in Tuesday through Friday. You have a great day.